Well, growing up, I wasn't necessarily very close with my parents, which I think is quite common for the generation I grew up in Scandinavia. We are not known to be very social beings and so on. And in the families, you don't normally talk about your feelings and disappointments and so on. And I think that's one of the reasons why, I made my own plans and I wanted to move overseas. I wanted away from Sweden. I wanted to experience the world. And I wanted to stand on my own feet.
Welcome to the Dad Central Show, hosted by Ed Gow Jr. and Drew Soleyn. We know dads want to see their kids succeed, but they don't always know how to get there. This show gives dads the tools they need to raise confident and successful kids. Well, what's up, everybody? As Ed would say, welcome to the Dad Central Show. I am your host, Drew Soleyn, and today I am without my co-host, Ed, but that's okay because we always have great conversations on the show, and despite Ed not being here, I'm really looking forward to this one. So again, the Dad Central Show, just wanted to let everyone know, is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. And when I think about positive impact, I think about the work that our guest is doing. He is having a positive impact in some of the areas that really matter most and have seen an explosion of need since the pandemic in particular. And that is in mental health. And so I know that's not the only area, but let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. It is Nick Jonsson, and he is a passionate and inspiring business leader. He's a best-selling author. He's a keynote speaker, a podcast host, and an award-winning entrepreneur. He is the co-founder and managing director of Executives Global Network, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, which is Southeast Asia's largest confidential peer group network, providing more than 800 senior executives and business owners a safe haven to share their challenges, receive support, and learn from each other. And I hope as we talk about it later today, we're going to talk more about this idea of safe haven, in particular for dads, because dads have often, I think, experienced similar things. But back to Nick's intro. Nick is deeply passionate about physical health, mental health, and emotional health awareness, and believes that well-being is crucial for leaders to perform at their best. He's also written a best-selling book called Executive Loneliness: The 5 Pathways to Overcoming Isolation, Stress, Anxiety, and Depression in the Modern Business World. So Nick is also a dad to a 14-year-old son. So Nick, there's much more I could say, but I'll stop there and I'll welcome you to the show. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. So Nick, welcome to the Dad Central Show.
Thank you so much, Drew. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have these opportunities to connect with people across the globe. And right now your network is in Southeast Asia, but I know we're having this conversation. You're actually in Sweden. So I love the fact that we can do this, connect across the globe and have these conversations. And most of them particularly because I think there's stories all over that can help support dads and support them being the best that they can be wherever they're at and wherever their situation is. And we all have unique stories. And so this is an opportunity for us to get to know you a little bit more. And so we like to start by getting the backstory. So Nick, maybe just give us a little bit more about what was life like for you growing up?
Well, Drew, I was born in Sweden and then I was educated in Australia. Then I realized that, Australia is too far away from Europe where I have my family. So I ended up halfway working in Southeast Asia, where I've been working as an executive the last 20 years, working my way up the ladder, starting as an account executive in the advertising space and working in public relations as a director, and eventually finding myself in a managing director space, general manager, running big international companies in Southeast Asia. That, of course, came with a lot of challenges and so on. And then also in the middle of this, I got married, had a son, and down the line here, life goes up and down. And I went through a divorce. I had some personal challenges a couple of years ago. And through that, I'm now in Sweden today, indeed, where my son lives with my ex-wife, but I'm working otherwise, and my life these days is in Southeast Asia. So it's a bit complicated, of course, to have your son in a different continent, but I have to make sure that I do everything I can to make that work.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear you say you grew up in Sweden, but then you were educated in Australia. And, I'm curious, what was and then you talked about family kind of drawing you a little bit closer to home. So maybe can you talk about, what was family life like for you growing up, and how did that become an important decision maker for you when you were thinking about education or then even work?
Well, growing up, I wasn't necessarily very close with my parents, which I think is quite common for the generation I grew up in Scandinavia. We are not known to be very social beings and so on. And in the families, you don't normally talk about your feelings and disappointments and so on. And I think that's one of the reasons why I made my own plans, and I wanted to move overseas. I wanted away from Sweden. I wanted to experience the world, and I wanted to stand on my own feet. So for me, it was quite natural. So as soon as I saved up enough money, I wanted to go out and explore. And that's what I did. And it has been a marvelous journey, but it also has been sometimes, as we will discuss today, a lonely journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's interesting. What do you think that family experience, as you said, not being as close to your parents, what do you think that contributed to as you began pursuing, your journey, which is education and then exploring the world? How has that impacted you?
It has been quite tough, because if you're not used to explain yourself, you're not used to discussing your feelings as a child in a family, then you also struggle to express those feelings later on with friends, colleagues, and also with a partner down the line. It become quite cold. So that was one of the issues. And these days, though, I have addressed all of these things, which we also will discuss today. Like you, Drew, I'm also an ICF certified coach, and I'm trying to lead with conversations and ask questions about curiosity around people around me, rather than not talking about these things.
Yeah. So, I mean, it seems that that experience and not sharing and maybe even feeling, a lot of dads can feel like it's all up to me. Like I've just got to take care of everything, right? And don't worry, like don't worry about it. Like I've got it, even though, but there's no real outlet for you. There's no place to actually express it, and you kind of, we think of it as like that bottle that's shaken up, and all of a sudden the pressure's building, but then there's no way to release that pressure, and then all of a sudden it explodes. And so maybe this is a good time for us to talk a little bit about like your experience then with how you've grown through that, and what differences. So maybe you can share a little bit of your story then that can bring people into understanding how you've been able to recognize that background, but then also make some shifts, or recognize that background and what it I guess did to you or for you as you developed.
Yeah, like you said, Drew, growing up, I had a lot of pressure. I had a lot of feelings internally that I couldn't really express, and I didn't really know how to express it. Sometimes it came through fighting in the teens, being in summer with the kids, and start fighting and punching some people from time to time, even though that was quite rare. But as a teenager also, I can remember finding alcohol, and that took the steam off. And, so typically on the weekends, I was with my friends already from the age of 15, 16, drinking beer. And that was my way to cope and to find a venue then to have, some good times. And I wanted more of that. That was also one of the reasons why I wanted to leave the country, because I didn't want to be controlled by my parents, having rules, what you can do and so on. So because we didn't talk about things, my way was to escape, and then I find my own way to have my own fun and do what I want. So it was an escape, and that eventually caught up with me later on in life. And as you age, and then when you cannot discipline yourself and you cannot control yourself, then a bad habit can turn into an addiction, which it happened in my case as I was going through some tough patches later on in life.
Okay, well, then maybe you can talk about your journey to becoming a dad. What were some of the things, the hopes or the fears you had, or even some of the challenges that came up in the process, and how did you manage them when that happened?
Yeah, so I became a dad in 2009. I lived in Vietnam at the time, working as a sales director for a cosmetic company there. And my career until then had been going well. I was getting the promotions, and I felt that everything was going wonderful. But one day I was let go and I was in complete shock. It was a big blow to my ego. I didn't know what to say. And I kept it secret for a moment until my ex-wife at the time told me that she was pregnant. And that's when I really, really fell into a big depression for the first time in my life, because there I was suddenly, realizing that I was going to be without work. And when you're working overseas on an assignment, you also lose your housing, you lose your work permit and all the rights to work in the country. And I didn't know what to explain to my parents. I didn't know what to say to my friends, and let alone, what to do. Where should I find a new job? Where should we live now when we're going to have a child? And I did what I shouldn't have done. I closed down. I didn't discuss with anyone. All I did was what I knew, and that was to go to the bar after work, having some drinks with my friends, having a good time, forgetting all about it, instead of opening up and explaining or seeking help for this.
And so what was that like then, in terms of the experience with your wife and, about to have a child, and, obviously choosing that a little bit of an escape, the word you've used. So how did that play out then over the next little bit, as obviously your son came into the world, and I'm assuming you found another role, and then of course the relationship. Can you talk about what happened there amongst the family as you were going through that time?
Yeah, so I didn't know how to discuss these feelings or the issues with my ex-wife either. I was just, as you said before, also, in a solution mood. I was looking for a solution mode, I should say. I was looking for a new job, and yes, eventually I landed a new job, but I was not well, obviously, due to what was going on in my life and the uncertainties and everything. The only thing I could imagine was, and thinking was, well, now I have a new job, but is it safe enough? Maybe in 2 months I'm going to fail my probation, and then I'm here again. So I was just full of insecurities and worries. And of course, that didn't make me a good employee. I was, not feeling well. I was therefore failing in my jobs, jumping from job to job, and I couldn't really find something that suited me and I was only regretting, having lost the job. I was full of resentments against my old boss and my company for letting me go. And still here and again, all these feelings were something that I just put all inside me, didn't talk to anyone about it. I didn't have a coach. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't tell my friends about it. Instead, I was seeing them to play golf or do something, have a good time together. And it didn't cross my mind, why would I bother my friends with this drama? It's for me to solve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the strong, tough exterior, right? I've got it all. I can take it. I can handle it. But on the inside, clearly, lots of, you said, full of insecurities, full of doubts. Some of those real questions and resentment and bitterness, right? Really toxic feelings. So, like, what did that mean then for you at home as a dad with your son?
Yeah, so my ex-wife and I didn't really speak about it. And what we did, though, was that we didn't fight either. It was just a cold relationship in that sense. And we just tried to do the best we could. And I think the best moments we had was probably together with our son. We tried to do some weekends away, and we tried to have some fun and make it for his sake, going to the zoo and travel to the theme parks and just traveling around to the nice destinations which are there in Southeast Asia. So on the outside, if you look at this, it would look beautiful, the family pictures and the albums, and on social media, everyone think you're living the dream, and I think for our son, he probably had a good time, and I think he grew up feeling different from how I felt, because I knew that this was an issue. So I started to at least be more engaging and opening already with him, even though it was later on and only a few years ago that I really opened up and changed the way I talk to him and so on.
Well, so it sounds like there's, that process of doing the best that you can with your partner, trying to fill the gap with experiences and creating some memories, which can be really positive, right? But as you said, there was still that lack of maybe engagement or opening up to him, which you've now adjusted. So this might come up, but my question, I guess, is like, when you think about that early time, what was the biggest challenge that you faced as a dad? And then how did you overcome it?
Yeah, the biggest challenge was indeed that I didn't have any support. And again, here we are quite far away from, from home. We don't have the support of grandparents. We don't have the relatives around. And having been an expat moving from country to country, you have new friends. You don't have anyone to rely on but yourself. So those are some of the issues and the challenges that we were faced with. On the positive side, you living in countries where you can eventually have a maid and a nanny, so you can get that support. So that's what we did. And my ex-wife and I both were busy working, focusing on growing our careers, and really having that as the primary goal. For me, I was still, insecure about my job. So that means that I worked harder than everyone else, putting in more hours, making sure that, I could prove myself that I was good. And as they say, many of the high achievers are indeed anxious overachievers, and I have to say that I was one of them.
Okay. When it comes to that process of being an anxious overachiever, did it translate into your parenting experience, or was it really isolated to your working experience?
I think in my son's early years, I was a bit of a perfectionist and quite strict, and especially in terms of making sure he didn't have sugar or unhealthy food and so on. And I was quite tough if someone. I can remember, for example, my sister one time when my son was 5 gave a Coke, and I freaked out, and because I was not well internally, also I couldn't really deal with those kind of things, and I could easily overreact and turn things into a fight or a conflict instead of keeping my cool and explaining my thoughts. So at this stage, we're talking about 7-8 years ago, I was not in a good space still. All these things that we discussed so far had all compounded, and I had not discussed it with anybody. It was just jumping from pushing hard, working well, getting fired or resigning, or a company got through a merger acquisition. I lost my job again. So it was, I lived in a very uncertain world, and the pressures was compounding.
Yeah, it sounds like it, right? And it sounds so challenging, right? In many ways, and to be able to kind of push through that obviously requires a lot of mental and emotional fortitude, or just a willingness to just suck it up and take a lot, which I think many dads or many men can probably relate to, right? And wherever that comes from, or whatever's happening, it's like, I've got to do it, right? If it's up to be, or if it's going to be, it's up to me, right? That sort of mentality, which is kind of what you're describing. So I guess at a certain point in time, something changed. So what happened? And then can you tell me like what that process was like for you to, after it happened?
Yeah, so if we go back to around 2015, then I had worked my career up again, and I was in a fantastic job, and I had the dream job in terms of responsibility and package and everything, and I reached the top. I basically reached the position that I always wanted to. Everything I worked for, and I had been relocated to Jakarta, Indonesia. I had everything, a nice house and the relationships, everything was looking good, and I was holding it all together. And I thought that finally I reached, but there I found myself feeling lonely, feeling not satisfied with things. And I was looking at things, not being grateful, but thinking that I can do better, I can have a better job. And then I was looking at my ex-wife, and I thought I can do better than this. So I thought, well, at this juncture, instead of, my company is terminating me, I should take charge of my own life. So I resigned from my job, divorced my wife, and then I didn't know what was home anymore. I didn't know who I was. And my bad habits, who I touched on a few earlier times in my life, creeped in. I lost my discipline on keeping up with my fitness, and suddenly I didn't go to the gym. I instead was drinking more beers with my friends, and my alcohol bad habits turned into an addiction. And with that, it was a very slippery slope. I lost my health completely in 2-3 years, from 2015 until 2018, when I hit rock bottom. And the rock bottom can look different for people. And for me, it was my body being broken down completely. I had written my will, my testament, and I really thought that I couldn't continue living.
Wow. That's pretty rock bottom. And so to get to the point where you feel like you can't continue living, there's got to be something that happens, because you're here. And, I read your intro at the beginning, you've achieved quite a few things. And so can you just bring us into that place, like, at rock bottom, and how you began to rebuild, or at least just get started on rebuilding?
Yeah, so still until here, I had not discussed these issues that I've gone through with anybody. And if you looked on the outside, still everything looked pretty good. The story I shared was, well, I was going to start my own business, and I resigned from the job, and I painted a picture of success. And I was again jumping from job to job instead, and trying then to put on this really successful image, and that I'm really well. And I was trying to still to do training, running marathons and so on, when I'm not physically and mentally well. And it's living this double life. And eventually something had to go. I just collapsed and I couldn't take it anymore. At that point, the pain was also so intense that I almost exploded. And luckily I did that. I did then tell, and I had just gotten remarried here at this stage. And luckily I told my new wife 3 weeks into the marriage. I explained to her how I felt internally. And she was also surprised and shocked, because all she had seen was this successful businessman on the outside who she thought had everything together. But immediately when I explained it to her, it was like something lifted from me. For the first time in my life, I had shared something, how I really felt honestly internally, and the pressure was off. And she immediately dragged me and took me to the doctor, and then again shared my story. She did most of the talking, but then I was exposed. My isolation, my thoughts was exposed, and with that the pressure was relieved, and I was on my way back to life again.
I'm curious to know, what caused you to keep it in so long?
I couldn't find an avenue to discuss it. I can remember over the years, as I was feeling not well about things, I can remember looking for psychologists, therapists, and so on. But remember, here I lived mainly in Vietnam, Indonesia, and so on. To find someone who was English spoken was not easy. And this is also, we're talking, 5 and 10 years ago, and it was before COVID, so not much was online. And I'm making excuses here now because that, but I was looking sometimes, thinking I should seek some help here. Couldn't find it. And also I was working in the medical industry, managing hospitals and clinics, sitting next to doctors, and so why should I seek this help? Everything should be fine. It's all this sort of denial. It's only looking back now that I can really clearly see how unwell I was, but I didn't understand it at the time. So it was only when I couldn't hold it together anymore, then I decided to open up about it.
Yeah, so it sounded like there were periods of time when you knew something wasn't quite right, and you started to look for some help, but there wasn't anything there, or at least nothing that you felt couldn't meet your needs.
Yeah, that's right. And this is very common, though. You would hear this because these days, and we will come to this, what I'm doing now, and what I understand, that this is very common. People are starting to think that they need help. Let's say they start to go in a search engine, look up a recovery program for some kind of addiction. They search it, and then maybe it's once a year or so, and they would do this search, but maybe even they go to the location, drive the car there, but then the stigma of entering this space or picking up the phone and calling this, it's a huge step. It's perhaps the biggest step of your life. So you will have many second doubts before you actually reach out to ask for help.
I'm curious, upon hindsight, what would have helped you take that step sooner? Or would anything have helped you take that step sooner?
There's many things, and that's what I dedicate my life for now, to making sure that others have this. And I talk a lot about this, Drew, in my book and in my work now. I say we have to be proactive about building what I call safe spaces or confidential spaces, both personally and professionally. And when I'm talking about personally, we as humans need to make sure that we are vulnerable with a couple of close friends of ours, especially as dads. We need to copy the women here. They have, I'm generalizing, but generally they have a few friends who they call and meet up with, and they discuss things. We dads need to do the same. I had fantastic friends, but I played golf with them. We watched sport. We were drinking beers, having a bloody good time. But I didn't share these things that we're talking about today. And we need to do this in the good times. We need to learn to be vulnerable and in the good times. And then on the professional side, I'm a big advocate of having mentors, coaches, sponsees, whatever it's called, making sure that we proactively have these relationships built up. So when we are feeling down or when we have issues, the step of calling these people or having someone who's checking in with from time to time is just naturally there. So you don't go as low as I did.
Are you a dad who feels like you're juggling a million things at once? Balancing work, family, and personal goals can be overwhelming. But what if there was a solution? That's why we created our new fatherhood community called Dad Mentor. For over 20 years, Dad Central has built practical tools to help dads. We understand the challenges you face and provide the support you need to thrive. The biggest complaint we hear from dads is there's no dedicated support for their specific needs. But not anymore. Our new community, called Dad Mentor, is here to transform your fatherhood experience. Imagine feeling in control, staying calm and patient when your children misbehave. Picture yourself connected to your children, guiding them with confidence and watching them succeed. When you join Dad Mentor, you'll have access to a community of like-minded dads committed to their dad journey, just like you. You'll also get the Dad's Roadmap. This is a step-by-step plan to help you go from unsure to unstoppable as a dad. Monthly masterclasses and Q&A sessions. You'll get answers and know exactly what to do straight from experts. Monthly group meetups that connect dads over common topics. A dad's resource library. Curated webinars, podcasts, or guides built by Dad Central to help you grow as a parent. And finally, you'll also get exclusive members-only offers and events. Now, many dads do try to do this fatherhood thing alone, only to find themselves trapped in frustration and strained relationships. Then they may turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms like drugs, alcohol, or other distractions, leaving their family and their own well-being at risk. We don't want you to reach that point of regret. Take steps to invest in you and your family today. Join Dad Mentor and go from stressed, tired, and overwhelmed to confident, calm, and connected. Join us today by going to dadcentral.ca/dads.
Yeah, great guidance, and hope, and we will talk more about this. But the word being proactive, right? So you had started the process and you started to be proactive, but it needs to be collectively, right? And so there's more. And you talked about vulnerability with close friends, having close friends, needing having mentors, coaches, people around you that you can, and then the core of being, building safe spaces, both personally and professionally. So certainly great insights. But what I think I'm curious about is to know, or going through that situation again, like what would you need to have happen to be able to feel safer? I know you talked about some of those things, but like, so if someone were to come up to you and say something to you, my guess is you probably would have denied it because you're like, no, everything's good. Like, what questions would you have need to have had? What would you need to experience from somebody else to feel like, you know what, I've been thinking these things, maybe I could possibly venture out into this?
Yeah, so indeed, it's about having some strong relationships where we are really open with each other. And I believe that in a coaching relationship, if you work with a coach, you will go through that. Maybe you've gone through the wheel of life where you discuss through all areas of your life. You rank it on that 1 to 10, and then then you have an honest conversation about it. That's one way. These days, though, I'm blessed since I came into recovery from my alcoholism. I had to go through one of those 12-step recovery programs. And the 12th step, though, that is that you have to give it back. As they say, you have to give back the gift to keep it. So for me, I have to, for the rest of my life, be there for others. And so I'm there as a volunteer and supporting this network. And even after this meeting here tonight, I'm going to a recovery meeting where I will be there to share my story, to help people who just have some issues now. And I'm spreading the message. Every day I'm spreading the message. And there's so many addictions these days. It's social media, it's gambling, it can be alcohol, drugs, or anything else that is an escape from a challenging life. And it's a world full of volunteers there. And the message I want to spread also today, if there's someone who's suffering, the step is not that great. You can actually look up one of these anonymous support organizations. We are full of volunteers. There's no fee, and you can come and have a conversation. So if you're that step is not as great as it was, as I imagined it would be. These days, I know better.
Yeah. Well, that just made me think of a story that I went through, a time when I went through really, really difficult times. It was in the midst of a separation. So my separation happened like out of the blue. It was a shock. And then it was extremely, there was false accusations. There was, my children essentially were, for lack of a better word, stolen, and I rarely got to see them in the height of that. And so, for that first 3 months post separation, it was some really, really dark times. And I remember, there was one night I literally could not, like, I just couldn't sleep. Like, the thoughts, the anger, like trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. How did this ever happen? And I just picked up the phone because I just did a search, like, call lines. And I knew I needed to talk to somebody, and I just picked up the phone and called. And all this person did was listen and ask a question or two, and then listen again and ask another question or two. And, after about 20, 25 minutes, I'd kind of gotten myself to a better place, but that's so important that if you need it, that you reach out. Because I think I hadn't thought about that phone call until our conversation for a long time. But I know that made a difference for me. And that one step, many people might not even take that step. So I guess I'm just trying to add on to your message here and saying, if you find yourself in those places, reach out, because that conversation might be something that helps you move to the next stage. And obviously, I'm here 2+ years later, and I've got essentially a new partner and a new baby, and our family is much more intact than it was back then. But that's important to reach out. And so maybe to continue this conversation and really leverage your experience, what I think isolation, I think loneliness, I think, the pressures are common for many dads, and many of them are unable to get to the place of being vulnerable or feeling like there's a close enough relationship or a safe place for them. So I guess, knowing that this is a challenge, and, you've tackled this challenge in a particular area, right, with executive loneliness right now. Can you maybe give some insight to us as dads and the people listening who maybe, what do we need to do to tackle this problem of isolation and loneliness that we might feel as dads or as men?
Well, I believe we all need to belong to something, and the society have changed. We used to belong to bowling clubs, and we have all different kind of organizations and clubs, and we need to be, again, I say the word proactive. We need to look out for these. And myself, I do triathlons. That means I swim, I cycle, and I run. So I belong to a swimming club, a swimming academy, a cycling club, and a running club, and a triathlon club. So I force myself to go outside of my comfort zone, because I'm an introvert, to socialize and build up these relationships, constantly building and nurturing relationship with human beings. We are social human beings, and we need to be proactive about this and disciplined about this. But I will also say that, we all need to have a safe place, because maybe talking in the bar or when you're out playing golf, it's not so easy. So we might need to also be proactive, setting up these safe spaces. And this can be a mastermind group. It doesn't have to be a paid service. If you are 4 or 5 dads, you can form your own mastermind group, and you say, okay, we're going to meet every second Thursday evening. We meet for dinner, and maybe you book a private dining room, or you take turns, if you can find a private space. And then you just chatting what's on your mind. Someone need to break the ice and starting, but you just talk honestly about what's going through in your life without judging. And that's really what we do in the recovery meetings. And that's so important, to get that sympathy from other people. Like you said, Rory, when you call that phone call, you felt better. And we need to do this frequently, because life is happening and we compound so much all the time. And that's what I do. That's why I keep going to recovery meetings. I haven't had a drink for 5 years, and I keep coming there to help others, but also to talk through what's going through in my life, to let the steam off and learn to discuss my feelings and thoughts. And that's what I can recommend to any dad, because life happens to everyone.
Yeah, I think you said something really important there. Someone needs to break the ice, right? You give the example of the mastermind. Dads just getting together for 4 or 5 of them, but then somebody's got to lead, right? And so, what if nobody's willing to lead? What if nobody's willing to share? Nobody's willing to be vulnerable. Does it still work? That's my question. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, so in my meeting tonight where I'm going, I will be, along with one other person, we will be the first to break the ice. We will be the first to share. I will share a summary of my version, what I discussed today here, and be very vulnerable. And I will, because it's a recovery meeting, I will focus on my alcohol issue I had. So the people that are coming, they are newcomers who just admit to themselves they need help with alcohol. So once I broke the ice and I shared my story, then we passed it naturally to the person sitting next to me, and he will be someone else who's had a few years experience with this. He will share, and then on it goes. You just need 1 or 2. So if you are the organizer of the mastermind, or you just prepare and you share something, and then it will never stop, and then people will be drawn to this, because as many people will say, it's the first time perhaps in their life when they've been truly honest to themselves and other people, and it's a wonderful feeling. Maybe for the first time they have that feeling of connection within them.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful and so important, to at least to get to a point where a person can say, wow, this is the first time I've ever done this, and in a safe place, in a place where they're not judged, where they're actually accepted and acknowledged of, wow, look what you've gone through, and, good for you for being willing to come and share it. And we're here to support you in that. I think that's a very, very powerful experience. So maybe let's talk a little bit about how this process has maybe reconnected you to your son.
Yeah, sure. So the fact that I had this crisis, it was also the biggest opportunity, because I repatched myself and I'm a completely different person now, 5-6 years into this. And because I constantly work on myself, and in the recovery program, then also I have been, making amends, making everything right from the past. I have admitted my mistakes, and I try to live differently these days. And luckily also my son was too small. He cannot even recall having ever seen me intoxicated or drunk or done any misbehavior. I was not that kind of person in that sense. But having now gone through also a coaching journey, I have, instead of being sort of a powerful, directive dad, I use coaching questions and curiosity, and by that he's drawn to me, because he likes to talk to me. He likes to spend time with me. The challenging part is that we live in different parts of the world, and that's why I'm in Sweden now. I've been spending some time working remotely from Sweden, running my company in Southeast Asia here, to spend more time with him. And our relationship, I believe, have never been stronger. And we're just completely open and transparent with each other. Which again, he would come to me if he have issues at school, and because he know I will not be angry, I will not judge him. Instead, we will discuss solutions, and I will let him feel that he's in charge, and he make the final cut and or the final decision on things. But I'm there to give him the best support I can.
How hard was it to get to the point where you admitted your mistake, and then take the next steps to, as you said, make amends when it comes to your son?
It's very, very painful, and it's a difficult journey, and not only to my son, but to my ex-wife and to my parents and everyone else, because I had been playing these games and putting on a show for quite some time, and I had to be completely transparent and honest with my close family, so they knew what was going on, and I had to tell them what path I'm on and so on. And I think it was difficult for some people to believe it in the early days, but now, a couple of years in, I think everyone can see it. But this honesty is something that I can see is favorable for my son. He feels very positive about it, and as I said, we can have quite deep, honest conversations about feelings and so on. And when he had some major issues at school, I think if it would have been me, I would never have told my parents. It was things involving that there was drugs in school, there was kids bringing knives to school and stuff, and it was a lot of things coming up. And he dared to talk to me about it. And I thought at that juncture, I asked him if he wanted to work on it and so on. And I actually hired a coach specialist in teenagers then, who could work with him differently to help him how he can protect himself. So let's say if he goes into a shop and his friends are shoplifting and he doesn't want to be part of this, how can he protect himself? Two ways: either so that he's not being caught in the crime, or that the kids bully him or beat him because he's not there. So he got some coaching in how to protect himself here. When these kind of things, as I was a teenager, if I was caught in it, I would have no idea how to behave, rather than to fight my way out of it. And my son now knows that it's a different way. And as soon as these pain points come up to him, he will immediately jump on the phone to call me and explain what have happened and ask for help.
So that's, to me, very powerful. It also brings back the idea of a safe place. So your son sees you as a safe place, even in the midst of some of these challenging situations that he's facing. And so, for the dad who's listening, or someone who works with dads and wants to help dads, how did you get to that? What were the, I guess, practical, specific things you did to create that with your son that you have now, given your story that we've been exploring today?
Well, it comes from a completely understanding and admitting to myself that I have no idea how to be a dad, and just asking questions, asking people who are dads. I can remember even just after my divorce, when I was going to see my son, I was even scared to see him because I didn't know how to talk to him. I wanted to engage him in conversations, but I thought he was closed and quiet boy and he didn't want to talk. So I was scared. So I even saw a child therapist who helped me, a couple of coaching sessions with me to prepare me, so I could have sheets of paper, what kind of questions I would talk to him about, how I will open up and so on. And that set the foundation for me to ask him the right questions. Which was really the start of everything we discussed here. But ongoing now, keep talking to other dads, and asking about tips and advice. And as soon as I hit the roadblock, well, then think, who can ask? Who's been there before? Is there someone I know? And we need to be open here. We need to share more when we know something and when we don't know it with each other.
I think that's a really important principle that I'm picking up just in the last little bit from you, is your willingness to prepare yourself and to ask for help, which is very different than the person you were talking about before, who is like, I've got it, I'll take care of it, I'm not even going to tell anyone what's going on. Yet now you're saying, you were scared, you acknowledged your own feelings, and then you went and spoke to a child therapist, someone who could help you, and they gave you the small building blocks of which you could start to rebuild. And then you're continuing to do that. Ask for help, get support, then re-engage. So I mean, that takes a lot. So, what can you share with, again, our listeners, who might have that same desire, same passion, but they might struggle with self-doubt, or they may struggle with whatever that would prevent them from just being willing to take that next step and ask for help and prepare themselves for whatever challenge they might be facing?
Well, I think honesty goes a long way here, and just being honest with ourselves. When we don't know something, trying to patch together and put on a show doesn't help anybody. So it's better to be yourself and be open and honest. And there are phone calls, as we discussed before, anonymous hotlines. There's so much support there. And I think one good thing which has come with the pandemic as well is that you don't have to go to a therapist in the office. You can have a Zoom session over your lunch break if you want with someone. So the step to ask for help, and you don't have to reveal your identity. So I think it shouldn't be that difficult. But again, Drew, as we discussed before, also, if we are a group of dads, we can have conversations together, either one-on-one, or we can form the mastermind groups, and then we can discuss best practice around these things, because there's no one who has all the answers. And I think we just need to be more open and honest with ourselves and admit that we don't have the answers.
Nick, this has been a really interesting conversation. It's brought up some things for me, and getting that memory that I hadn't even thought of. And so, I think that that's a great place for us to kind of wrap up, because that admitting that we don't have all the answers might be the hardest step for many dads, right? But recognizing that's actually the first and most important step to begin moving in the direction that you want, of a healthier relationship, stronger family, better bonds, and even just a better life for yourself. So, Nick, this has been a real honor. So thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing your story. But, where can people learn more about you and what you're offering?
Well, it's been great being on the show, Drew. Thank you so much for the Dad Central show. It's fantastic to talk about this. And if people want to look me up, they can go on LinkedIn and look up Nick Jonsson. That's NickJonsson, with a dash between. That's right. Or my website, which is nickjonsson.com. And there also, if someone is interested in my book, they can look up the Executive Loneliness book there. It's also on Audible if someone prefers it as an audiobook.
Well, Nick, that's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. Maybe a final word for dads. What's your final word for them as they're listening today?
Well, the final word is indeed that if it's something on your mind, if it's something that keep you awake at night, then whatever those things are, write it down on a paper and make sure that you call someone, you speak to someone, and just ask for help. Just take that first step before it becomes something bigger.
You heard it from Nick. I couldn't say it any better. So, Nick, thanks so much again for being here. Really honored to have you on the Dad Central Show.
Thank you.
All right. Well, normally Ed and I would do a little takeaway, but I think Nick gave us the great takeaway right there. If something's on your mind, write it down, and then find a way to express it to somebody you trust, somebody that's going to be safe, somebody that can help support you and help you move forward from that place. And so, as always, I want to remind everybody that the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. And of course, the Dad Central Show is one of our great resources, but we have a ton of other great resources, and you can find them all at dadcentral.ca. We also love feedback or guest suggestions or just comments. And you can do that by sending us an email at podcast@dadcentral.ca. And finally, if you listen to the show, you're finding value, please rate or give us a review on Apple, because the more feedback we can get, the more it helps us and the more it helps the show. So thanks so much for listening. And as Ed likes to say, remember to give yourselves grace and don't just manage your time, manage your energy.